Hello friends and welcome back to this course titled as British Poetry. Friends, we are on Unit 5 and discussing John Milton's seminal text Paradise Lost, Book 1 and Book 9, which are prescribed in our syllabus. Today we are going to discuss few more aspects of this book Paradise Lost related to the concept of blank verse or the original sin, etc. So in this 30 minutes duration, you would be able to estimate blank verse as a unique style of writing. What kind of, let's say, writing is blank verse? What does it suggest? And on the other hand, you would also be able to relate the question of original sin in relation to prescribed text. Now friends, what is original sin? Basically, we are here talking about the sin committed by Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were the first humans, were the originators of humanity created by God Himself. So, the sin which is committed by Adam and Eve by eating the fruit of knowledge can be considered as the original sin. So, we will be discussing about these two biblical concepts. One will be rhetorical concept discussing about the blank verse, and other one will be the biblical concept discussing about the original sin. So, without wasting much time, let us now move to the first topic which we have to discuss today, that is blank verse, the concept, definition and its characteristics. During the age of Shakespeare and Marlowe, English blank verse belonged mainly to the realm of the theatre. Shakespeare's sonnets follow conventional rhythmic scheme. Friends, when we talk about, let's say, the age of Shakespeare or Marlowe, 16th century, Elizabethan age, English blank verse belonged mainly to the realm of the theatre. Means, this concept of blank verse was related to theatre writing only. The writers used to write theatre. The writers used to, let's say, include this concept of blank verse into writing dialogues, etc. Shakespeare's sonnets follow conventional rhyme scheme. So, when we talk about the writings of Shakespeare, we see that Shakespeare was a person who used to write in a rhyme scheme. His sonnets, as all of you know, that Shakespeare was the one who wrote 154 sonnets. So, he has written his sonnets in conventional rhyme scheme. In the mid 1600s, however, John Milton, who was born in 1608 and died in 1674, rejected rhyme as but the invention of a barbarous age and promoted the use of blank verse for non-dramatic works. Friends, when we look at the ideology of John Milton, we see that he is a person who thinks that rhyme used to be written in the barbarous age. It is old fashioned, it is traditional. So, in the recent times, we must use blank verse. His epic poem Paradise Lost contains 10,000 lines in iambic pentameter, which is in itself a very challenging work. But John Milton was able to write iambic pentameter into 10,000 lines. To preserve the rhythm, Milton shortened words, eliminating syllables. Notice the abbreviation of wandering in his description of Adam and Eve leaving paradise. Friends, we know that in blank verse there is some kind of rhythm. And Milton had created that rhythm by shortening words. He eliminated syllables. So, we can see that in the scene where Adam and Eve are leaving paradise. Let us quote this poem, these lines from the poem, and try to understand that how blank verse is used into these lines. And I quote, "The world was all before them, where to choose their place of rest, and providence their guide. They hand in hand, with wandering steps, and slow through Eden took their solitary way." We can see here that there is, let's say, no exact rhyme which is created, but there is rhythm of the words. Whether he has shortened the word wandering, or whether the choice of words is used in the lines, suggesting that Milton is trying to create blank verse, a rhythmic pattern in these lines. In a prefatory note to the poem, Milton explains that he has chosen to write Paradise Lost in what he calls English heroic verse, without rhyme, that is in unrhymed iambic pentameter. Friends, Milton himself thought that he chose English heroic verse to write this poem. This heroic verse is without rhyme, and we can call it an unrhymed pattern of writing poetry in iambic pentameter. And Milton says that he is done so because Homer and Virgil wrote their epics in unrhymed Greek and Latin respectively. So, Milton is very much setting himself up as their successor. Friends, as all of you know, that Milton believed in the traditional classical values and style of writing. He appreciated those writers. So, here Milton is giving the justification by quoting the example of Homer and Virgil, suggesting that they have also used unrhymed verse. So, he has also used it in English language like Greek and Latin. Rhyme, he goes on, was the invention of a barbarous age to set off wretched matter and lame meter. So, John Milton thinks that rhyme is something that is out-fashioned, barbarous. So, there is no sense of using that kind of, let's say, lame meter into poetry. Some of Milton's contemporaries use it pretty well, he admits, but he still finds that they do so because they are carried away by custom, by much of their own vexation, hindrance, and constraint to express many things otherwise, and for the most part, worse than else, they would have expressed them. So, friends, we can see that Milton is, let's say, somewhere different from his contemporaries. He wants to carried away by custom, much of its own vexation, hindrance, and constraint to express many things otherwise. And for the most part, worse than else, they would have expressed them. So, Milton is trying to say that he wants to express something that is not expressed by his contemporaries. In other words, there will be no childish or vulgar rhyme for Milton in Paradise Lost, since that would be beneath his epic ambition and would constrain his ability to tell the story he wants to tell. Friends, we can understand that Milton has intentionally chosen this kind of, let's say, English verse or heroic verse style of writing. There will be no childish or vulgar rhymes for Milton. There is nothing like, let's say, ironical in Milton's work. Milton is a serious writer, and the epic ambitions which he had, they were not, let's say, will be fulfilled into that earlier prior style of writing. That would constrain his ability to tell the story he wants to tell. The very fact that Milton felt the need to defend his decision suggests, of course, that readers of his day would have expected to read rhyming verse. Friends, we can, let's say, assume from the work of John Milton that he felt the need to defend his decision, and that he did very well, because he knew that readers of his day would have expected to read rhyming verse, and he did not want to use rhyming verse into his poetry. He wanted to do little different kind of experience into his poetry. Milton instead ends his prefatory note by telling readers that they should be thankful he has recovered the ancient liberty that classical authors enjoyed, and has subsequently rescued English poetry from what he calls bitingly the troublesome and modern bondage of rhyming. Friends, Milton considered rhyming as a burden on poetry. He wanted to free poetry from this, let's say, restriction, let's say, binding of rhyming, which is why he wanted to recover the ancient liberty what the classical authors enjoyed. And when he is writing poetry, then obviously he must write following the ancient liberty or ancient ways of thinking. The most common rhyme of Milton's his day was the couplet and two-line rhyme. But couplets, while easily memorized, also tend to encourage their authors to keep their thoughts within the rigid demarcation of rhyme itself. So, as friends, all of us know that in, let's say, the beginning of the neoclassical literature, neoclassical age, when Dryden was writing, Milton was writing, the most popular kind of writing style was couplet, heroic couplet, two-line rhyme. It can be easily memorized. But on the other hand, Milton think that it also tend to encourage their authors to keep their thoughts within the rigid demarcation of the rhyme itself. So, there is a rigid demarcation of rhyme which exists in that style of writing. Blank verse allows an author to not be constrained by rhyme, which is limited to English. Friends, when we talk about this term blank verse, we feel that blank verse is a term which, let's say, allow the author not to constrained by rhyme, which is limited in English, and which is why John Milton has adapted the style of blank verse. John Milton wanted to write in blank verse because he do not want to limit the English language under the pressure of rhyme and set rhythm. Yet it still creates a more poetic sound and sense of pattern due to regular use of stressed and unstressed syllables. Friends, when we talk about, let's say, this poetic sound of blank verse, we see that there is a pattern which is due to the regular use of stressed and unstressed syllables. There is a pattern which is, let's say, used in blank verse in iambic pentameter. As all of you know, that one line contains 10 syllables. The first one is unstressed, then the second syllable is stressed, then unstressed, then stressed, and this pattern goes by the end of that line. So, Milton thought that there is a regularity of stress and unstress which can be created in blank verse, which is why he used it in his poetry. Meter is generally easier to use in English than rhyme, since the majority of words are short, 1 or 2 syllables, unlike in Romance language. Friends, this is something which is analysis of blank verse. When we talk about the meter, the length of the line, it is easier to follow a meter in English language because the words of 1 or 2 syllables can be chosen, and in this way we can follow the 10 syllable style, unlike the Romance languages. So, in this way we can see that in rhyme the majority of words are short, and thus Milton has used blank verse into his poetry. Thus it was in favor with English poets for nearly half a millennium. So, when Milton started using blank verse, almost for half a, let's say, millennium, this style of writing became popular. Free verse has replaced blank verse in popularity in the most recently written poetry, however. Friends, when we talk about the recent time, the contemporary time, we see that free verse, which has no rhyme, no rhythm, no iambic pentameter, nothing, that style of writing in the contemporary time has replaced blank verse in popularity. Now in British poetry, free verse is more used than blank verse. So I hope that you have now understood why Milton has used blank verse into his poetry. Milton thought that he wanted to free his poetry from the limitations of rhyme, which is why he used blank verse, which has no rhyme, but it is written in a meter, that is iambic pentameter. And the rhythmic pattern which Milton has created in his poetry is something which is created from the choice of words, from the length of the line, and from, let's say, shortening the words by adding any apostrophe or comma into them. Let us now move to the next topic which we have to discuss in today's class. It is the question of original sin. How this question of original sin is related to Paradise Lost, or we can also say that how Paradise Lost can be considered as a biblical epic, a mythological book. So, let us discuss now about this concept of original sin in reference to Paradise Lost. Paradise Lost is basically a dramatization of the original sin, the explanation of how evil entered the world, then began as God's perfect creation. Friends, when we talk about this concept of original sin, we see that God created a paradise which was perfect. God created two human beings who were also perfect. But then this sin of eating the fruit of knowledge was the first sin committed by human beings, and which has ruined the perfection in the creation of God. God is trying to create a perfect world, but human beings, from their concept of free will, from their, let's say, rebellious attitude, worked against the will of God. For a Christian like Milton, sin is everything that breaks God's laws, including acts that do harm to other humans and acts that upset the hierarchy of the universe. Friends, Milton was a person who was a true Christian in his behavior, but he do not want to adapt the supremacy of church. For him, sin is everything that breaks God's laws. So, he was a true believer in goodness, including acts that do harm to other humans and acts that upset the hierarchy of the universe. Friends, Milton says that anything that harm human beings is a sin. Anything that violates the hierarchy of universe is a sin, which is why Milton was a true Christian in his spirit. God's heaven of good angels and the original paradise are both innocent places, free from any sin and happiness. And Milton tries to describe this pure innocence, though he is using fallen language in terms of natural joy, worship of God, and even a kind of blissful ignorance. Friends, when we talk about the concept of God's heaven, where good angels used to live, or when we talk about original paradise created by God, where Adam and Eve used to live, they were innocent places. There was no sin or unhappiness in those places. And Milton was trying to describe this innocence through the use of fallen language. Fallen is used for rebel angels. So when we say that Satan was a fallen angel, it means he was someone who is now away from natural joy, worship of God, and even blissful ignorance, which is why they are fallen, which is why they are alone in their life. As Adam doesn't know what death is, except that it is bad, and Raphael warns Adam about wanting too much about the cosmos. So friends, when Adam and Eve used to live in paradise, they had no death, no old age. But now Adam is curious to know about the cosmos. Raphael, another good angel, warns Adam not to think much about the cosmos, just live comfortably into this paradise. But Adam was a curious person, which is why he wanted to know more about this world, this cosmos. The original sin of Adam and Eve is then the ultimate fall from innocence. As their act introduces sin into the world, along with the host of other evils, like some animals becoming carnivorous. Friends, when we talk about this biblical concept of Adam and Eve, we see that when they eat the fruit of knowledge, It is the ultimate fall from innocence. So, the condition of Adam and Eve is also just like Satan. They disobeyed the order of God. Their act introduces sin into the world, which is why whatever, let's say, wrong is happening in the world now can be initiated by Adam and Eve from their first sin. They introduced sin to the world, and which is why it is written in the biblical books that some animals became carnivorous after introducing sin to the world. The forbidden tree gives Adam and Eve knowledge. But along with knowledge of evil, it also brings evil itself. And the single disobedient act spirals quickly into lust, anger, and pride. Friends, when we talk about this concept of forbidden tree, the forbidden tree had the fruit of knowledge. All of us know that knowledge is good, but according to this book, knowledge is bad. Why knowledge is bad? Because it brings evil with it. When we have knowledge, we not only have the knowledge of goodness, but badness as well. Good and evil both are now known to human beings. And slowly, the bad characteristics like lust, anger, pride enter into the behavior of a human being. So, the fruit of knowledge is responsible for all kind of sins committed in this world, present world. At the end of the poem, Michael shows Adam visions of the future, in which there seems no innocence left at all. All brothers murder brothers, disease and suffering rule, and the people worship false gods. So friends, when we come to the end of this book, Paradise Lost, we see that there is a good angel, Michael, who is talking to Adam. There is a long discussion between them. Michael is talking about the future of humanity and earth, where he says that before the doomsday, no innocence will be left in this world. Brother is going to murder brother. There will be lot of diseases. There will be lot of suffering. These things are going to, let's say, spread everywhere. People are going to worship the false gods, the gods which are not real, the God which is not omnipresent, omnipotent, but the God which is created by evil itself. The only hope for the future is the coming of God's Son, Jesus, who will eventually break the power of evil and save those who accept him. So, we are now, friends, leading to the Christian beliefs, and we see that what is the only hope for future? It is the coming of God's Son, the reincarnation of Jesus Christ, who will eventually break the power of evil and save those who accept him. So, there is a full devotion which is required for Jesus Christ. God cannot restore the ignorant pre-fall innocence of Eden after sin has entered the world, but he can draw goodness out of the knowledge and experience of sin, which creates the hope and optimism at the poem's end. Friends, God also has his limitations. God cannot, let's say, restore the ignorant pre-fall innocence. If Adam and Eve has eaten the fruit of knowledge, then they have to suffer from the punishment. God cannot, let's say, restore their act of sin. Now, after sin that has entered the world, but He can draw goodness. God can create goodness to compete with badness or evil in the world. He can create, let's say, goodness out of knowledge and experience of sin. And in this goodness, we can say that there is a hope that can be created, an optimism that can be created, and that is written in the end of the poem. I hope that you have now understood that this concept of original sin is related to the concept of, let's say, knowledge and free will. The characters are now free from their decisions, that whether they wish to choose the evil or they wish to choose the goodness. Before, the condition was not the same. When Adam and Eve had not eaten the fruit of knowledge, they were ignorant about evil. They were happy in their lives. But now they have to choose between good and evil. And this is the, let's say, change which has come into the human generations. You and me, both of us have now the capacity to decide whether we wish to ruin our life by choosing evil, or we wish to make our life paradise by choosing goodness. That is all for today. Thank you for listening.